So if you guys want to follow along. After Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brothers Esau came in from hunting. He too prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, "My father, please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing." His father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I am your son," he answered, "your firstborn Esau." Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taking my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" Isaac asked Esau, "I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" So Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." Then Esau wept aloud. And the second passage is Genesis chapter 28, verse 10 to 22. Jacob left Beersheba and left out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. All people on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and I will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me the food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and the stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth."
There's an aftermath of an act of faith. And I like to use that word aftermath a lot of different times. As I keep saying, we live in the aftermath of the life, death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. His event changed the world, and we live in the effect of that change. But the people of God also causes ripples. An act of faith, a life of faith, causes ripples to the future generation that affects how they think and how they live afterwards. And we have been talking about Abraham. And the life of Abraham, as I have been characterizing, has been that of God breaking into Abraham's life and getting involved in various different aspects of his life. And we've explored how we often put up barriers as we walk in faith, because we don't want God to be involved too closely with our lives. We don't want to let God do things that directly affect how we live, what we do, and the things that happen to us, especially when things involve our deepest dreams and hopes. For example, in Abraham's case, that was the child, Isaac, because he could never have a child with the woman he loved. And we saw how through the years and years, Abraham had to wait, as God promised that he would give Abraham descendants. And you can't have descendants unless you have a child. And Abraham had to go through that period of waiting and watching his dream fade and die, until not even sort of bitterness or sadness remained, only that of just fading regret, I suppose. And then God acts. And last week we saw how after God acts and brings Isaac to birth, God asks for Isaac back. He asked Isaac to be sacrificed. And we explored how this was an act of faith, that God was asking Abraham, you saw how I have been acting throughout your entire life. You saw how I've been accomplishing things that were beyond your expectation and your imagination. You saw how I've been faithful in fulfilling the promises. Now, who do you see I am? What do you think? Do you really get me? Do you understand my heart? And Abraham passed the test. God wasn't exactly asking Abraham to do a human sacrifice. What God was trying to see was that, do you believe and do you get me enough that I will fulfill and I will be faithful to my promise? And that is how it's read in the book of Hebrews later on. That I'll be faithful to my promise, even if you were to offer up the life of that one son whom I have given you and who I have placed all of my promise, so that if he dies, that promise dies. Do you get me enough that you can offer him up and still know that I will come through on my end? And when Abraham did so, Abraham's faith was complete. That was his act of faith. That was him finishing the course, as in, his task, his homework, his course of faith. And that leaves a mark. Because if you read on to Isaac's story, you will notice something. If you ever try to read through the entire Bible from Genesis to the very end, you will notice that after Abraham's very exciting set of stories, Isaac's story tend to be, lackluster. If I were to ask you, hey, so what did Isaac do? A lot of people, I would bet, even if you know what kind of things happened in Abraham's life, and if you know something about what happened in Jacob's life, a lot of people will be hard-pressed to tell me what exactly Isaac did, other than have children, Esau and Jacob. And you have to think, is it because Isaac lacked faith? Is it because Isaac didn't have a full relationship with God? And you'll find that, no, that's not quite so. There is that one episode which characterized Isaac's life. Okay, I don't know whether you remember, if you read it, Isaac digs a well, and he succeeds. The well has water, and he has a very good well to draw water from. And the people, his neighbors, look at this, and they get really jealous because, if you live in the Middle East, if you live in a place where there is not that much water, water is very precious. And just because you dig around doesn't mean that you'll always hit water. Any more than just because you dig around, you'll always hit gold. So, actually getting a working well, that's a big deal. That's like hitting oil. And they were very angry because Isaac did it on his first try. So they said, we want that well. So they were quarreling and fighting over it. And Isaac basically said, okay, sure, take it. So he goes, digs another well, or digs another hole in the ground, and lo and behold, he hits water and he gets another well. And the neighbors look at it and they say, what? That's so unfair. So they go over and start fighting with him again. That well is ours too. And Isaac says, okay, sure, you can keep it. He moves and digs another well. And this happens 7 times. And on the 7th time, the neighbors finally got tired of it. They're like, oh, he's gonna go, and every time he digs, apparently he's just going to hit water. So we'll just let him keep that well. And Isaac said, wow, that's great. I'll just name this well a particular name, which means peace. There's no quarrel. And that's the only specific, special episode about Isaac. But what this actually tells you is that Isaac is crazily blessed. He has lived a life. He has grown up in the shadow of Abraham's faith. Abraham's life of faith looms over Isaac's life such that miracles and God's blessing has become a commonplace for him. Now, for those of you who have gone on to mission trips or any sort of trips to more poorer nations, you will testify, or I have heard, that electricity is not something that can be taken for granted. Sometimes you get electricity and you can turn on the light. Sometimes you can't. It doesn't happen. just because you flick on the switch, light doesn't always come on. Here it's different. We assume that when we press the switch, light will come on, and when the light comes on, there's no surprise. There's no wonder. We simply assume it. It has become part of our lives. We understand in our heads that it takes a special infrastructure and a special nation and a special privilege, really, as far as the entire world is concerned, to be in a place where we can take electricity and the lights and computers for granted. We know in our heads, but in our lives it has become a commonplace. In Isaac's case, however, God's blessing and God's miracle had become a commonplace. Not that he didn't simply take it for granted or he sort of looked down upon it. He just have lived through a kind of life, and he has seen a kind of life through his father, that God will take care of him no matter what. So he's not that worried. You see, interesting stories happen when there are tensions, when you don't know how things end. When Abraham's story becomes exciting because Abraham had to always worry, what if God's promise never comes to be? What if I've been tricked all along? Look, Sarah is now long past childbearing age. God has promised, and he has specifically promised that he will give me a child through Sarah. So if this doesn't happen, that makes God a liar. But there is no sign that Sarah will have a child. Have I lived my life in vain? Did I listen to him wrong? Should I sleep with Sarah's maidservant so that I can have a contingency plan? That brings a tension story into the story. Isaac's story, however, there is no tension because Isaac knows that God's going to come through. He doesn't have to worry. For normal people, they have to worry, thinking, I have no water. If I have no water, I can't feed my flocks. I can't get a drink. What am I going to do? Maybe I can dig there, but there's no guarantee that even if I dig there for even a month, there will be no water. But for Isaac, who has lived through and who himself is a miracle, the very fact that he's alive is a miracle. For Isaac, digging a well is not a problem. There is no tension. That is the after effect. That is the ripple of Abraham's faith coursing through his next generation. And this is a very interesting pattern. How should I put it? The difficulty and the completion rate of the course of faith that God places us in determines the kind of life that our next generation of faith live in. That might have sounded a bit too complicated. Let me break it down for you. If God has placed us through a very difficult course of life in which our faith is tested to the utmost limits, and we complete it with flying colors, then the next generation of people of faith who has watched this happen, they tend to live a life that is, not always, but they tend to live a life that is much more, spiritually relaxed. They live a life that is, it lacks the tension and the fear and the toil and the trouble because they are now living in the after effect, the ripple of our faith. And that's Isaac. That is the reason why Isaac's story tends to be so boring. It's boring because Isaac is already living an extraordinary life. However, our story is that of Esau and Jacob. What happens the generation afterwards who has not personally witnessed the kind of power that God acts on behalf of his people? They have not personally witnessed the kind of journey of faith, the struggle and the fear and the sorrow and the joy of discovering who God is. For that generation who haven't personally seen it, what happens to them? Now, we began the story of Abraham because I wanted to cover a story of a person who is discovering God, who is establishing his relationship with God not because he's already an apostle or a minister or something like that, but someone who lives a very ordinary life, who is suddenly picked up by God. And in his ordinary life, God is not actually asking Abraham to be a missionary or anything like that. Although Abraham's life is supposed to show God to the world, but he's not asking Abraham to be a specific priest or something like a pastor of our age. He lived an ordinary life, a shepherd or nomad. So we wanted to see what kind of life a person who's living a life in the world, so to speak, who is now discovering God, what kind of life would he live? That was Abraham. But Jacob's story is even more pertinent, I suppose, because it is talking about a person who has heard about God, who has read, well, not quite read, but in our case, read about God, who knows people who have directly experienced God and who live in the shadow, who live in the after effect of that faith, but who has not personally experienced God. He may have a bit, but he hasn't gone on that journey yet. And for a lot of us in the church, we are placed in the same situation, like Jacob and Esau. We are in the church, and we bother waking up every Sunday early enough to come to the church, sit and worship, to sing praises and listen to me speak or listen to other pastors speak. Hopefully because you know, at least in your head, and you have heard that God does things. Perhaps you are here because even though you yourself have not experienced it, you have seen people, perhaps your parents, perhaps your grandparents, perhaps just other people, your spiritual mentors, that seem to have directly witnessed and walked with God, and you see it, and you acknowledge what that kind of life is, and you're here. That's why you're here. But nothing beyond it. So, sort of like Esau and Jacob. Esau and Jacob knows who God of Abraham is, knows who God of Isaac is. He has seen God act sort of in Isaac's life. They know there's something up. There's something up with Isaac. There's something up with his father. And they have heard the great things about their grandfather. So, how do they come to discover God? Like Abraham, you will find that Isaac and Jacob certainly did not change profession. They remained a shepherd and a hunter. And especially in Jacob's case, as a day worker, he went through various different jobs. How did he discover God? How did he come to walk with God in the everyday life and work? What happened to him? It's especially important because in the next week's passage, we'll talk about how Jacob's name becomes Israel. And you recognize the name Israel. It's the name of a country. Israel is the name of the people of God. And Jacob is supposed to represent, perhaps even more than Abraham, what the people of God is like. So what is Jacob like? And what is Esau like? Well, to do that, we need to go back all the way to the story of their birth. So Isaac, like everything else, he has things sort of handed to him by God. So even his wife, Rebekah, Isaac didn't have to do much. Some servant named Abraham's servant went to a faraway land to get Isaac's wife, and God guided him miraculously to meet the perfect woman, and perfectly suited to him apparently. And he finds Rebekah. Rebekah comes with him without any trouble at all. Isaac really didn't have to do anything at all. Rebekah came, married him, and they live a uneventful and fairly happy life. Rebekah was childless for a while, but it says Abraham prayed for her and she had a child. It isn't even like the story of Abraham. You would think that, like Abraham, he had to worry about his wife being childless. No. Isaac just prayed, then she conceives, then she have children. And she became pregnant with twins. And as the pregnancy was going along, she realized that the two children inside of her were somehow struggling against each other, fighting. She can actually feel them like fighting inside her. And she's like, what on earth is this? Like, why is this happening to me? So she prayed and she gets this prophecy from God. which said that there's two nations inside of you. Both of your children will become a nation, but the younger will serve the older. So when she gives birth, the firstborn, it says, as hairy, I guess as hairy as babies can be. I guess sort of like a lot of peach fuzz or whatever that is, sort of reddish. So they said that's Esau. But as the child was being taken out of the womb, they realized that there's another one, the twin, and he wasn't coming out separately. The twin was coming out by grabbing onto the heel of his brother, as if each were fighting to be the firstborn, but Esau was apparently the stronger or whatever. He comes out first, and Jacob's like, I'm not going to let you. He grabs the heel, and he gets dragged out. So they say, oh, let's name him Jacob. It means grab the heels. That seems to be the kind of personality that Jacob had. He wasn't strong, but he was a bit spiteful. He was kind of greedy. Esau, however, seemed to have been talented even from a young age. So if you know sibling rivalry, and I hear that with twins it's even worse, but even siblings with close age, you have a rivalry. The rivalry becomes even more severe when you're sort of alike. You had the same role in the family. And I have a younger brother. I've talked about him often. He's 3 years and 3 days younger than I am. And he surpasses me in almost every area. Every area. It's quite, well, not infuriating, because I guess my personality is slightly weird in that sense. I actually like seeing skilled and talented people at work. So watching my brother do things that are amazing, I'm like, wow, that's great. One other thing that he showed his aptitude early on was actually music. He's a medical doctor, by the way, but he was music. He was about 3 years old, and he starts sitting up, and he can't reach the piano board like this, so he has to score like this. And he started playing a melody that he heard from a radio. He's like 3 years old. And I look at him, I'm like, oh my, and I just began playing the piano. At that point, I was doing, what do you call it, the do, re, you know that thing? The very, very basic one. And he starts playing the melody. He never practiced. I'm like, oh my gosh, that guy's a genius. I was 6, but I knew what a genius was. So and I don't know whether this will surprise you or not, but I did practice piano until I reached level 10, grade 10 in conservatory or whatever. After that, it's ARCT, you play you become a piano teacher. I went up to 10, but when I was in level 7, my brother surpassed me. That wasn't very surprising, but my piano teacher was really worried because, I'm the 3 years and 3 days older brother, and my brother who started later actually gets into a higher level, and she's like, so how do you feel about that? I'm like, how do you feel about what? It's like, it's okay. I'm like, of course it's okay. And go, no, you don't have to, hide. I'm like, no, it's fine. The guy's a genius. I always knew he's a genius. But I could sort of say it because the thing that I really like doing, the thing that, the field that I'm involved in even right now, is something that he has no interest in and he's not that talented in. He's still better than most people, very annoyingly so. But that isn't my field. Field of philosophy, humanities, theology, or even this. He's not that good at it. So there is that sort of distance. But I could only imagine if music was my field or medical science was my field. He had a double specialty. He had several universities like fight over him for him to go and become their, what do you call it, fellow or whatever. And everything he does, he seems to succeed. So even if I have very little interest in being a doctor, by the way, medical doctor. The other doctor, yeah, sure, but the medical doctor, no. But even then, I sometimes feel like, my brother, he earns a lot more money than me, obviously. He's, I guess, more masculine than me. He has a full Santa Claus beard, but he sort of trims it. More musical. He can cook. Dang. But you see, Esau and Jacob was a twin. They're twin brothers. And in those days, you don't have a lot of different jobs there. You basically are you a good shepherd? Are you a good hunter? Because they didn't own the land, there wasn't any option to be, are you a good farmer? There isn't an option to be, are you a good scholar? Basically, are you a hunter and a shepherd? Jacob, we find that he was neither. He was good at neither of these things. Esau was excellent apparently at both, especially hunting. And hunting in those days also meant that you were a great fighter and a warrior. You are right there on the cusp of being a hero. He was also hairy, and I have heard recently that apparently beards are back in. And actually, beards are now back in, and it's kind of going out of fashion. I have no idea. I wouldn't know, but that's what I read in the BBC article. So I guess beards are now okay, but in those days, beards were necessary. If you read different literature of that era of around not just that culture, but in the Western culture, one of the insults was that you boy with no beard. It's an insult. It's like it's saying you girly boy, or you're not old enough to pull your own weight. That's what it means. Esau was hairy, which means that he was seen as this epitome of masculinity and manly man. And of course, he excelled at hunting. And we read in this passage, he actually also can cook. Isaac doesn't ask Esau to hunt a game and ask some woman to prepare food for him. He said, can you prepare food for me? So apparently he can cook, or at least he was popular enough with women to have them cook for him. Why? Well, we didn't read that passage, but Esau got married early too. Apparently women loved him enough that he got married to 2 different women around the neighborhood, while Jacob was still sitting by his mother's side. Now Jacob was the opposite of everything that Esau was. He doesn't hunt. He doesn't do a lot of, manly work. It actually says that he just hung around his mother. That's not a compliment, by the way. It doesn't mean that he's a very pious son helping out. No, it means that he's not really good for anything, so he just sits around doing work that is not fit for man. That's what it actually means. He's very smooth. He has no body hair. His facial hair is not, sort of something to laugh at. So, sibling rivalry with the same goal, same ideals. My brother and I have very different ideals of what we want to do. But even then, I sometimes go, oh man, my brother, he keeps making him look bad. But for Jacob, Esau always made him look bad. So what set Jacob apart? Well, there's something that happened earlier on in the story. Esau, like always, went hunting game, and it says even Isaac, his father, loved Esau more than Jacob. And you can sort of imagine why. Esau is like he's like the apple of my eye. He's a son I'm proud of. And Jacob, I don't know, I guess he's a late bloomer, I hope. So Esau went and started hunting, and he came back and he's famished because he's been out in the wilds all day. And Jacob, like the person who can never hunt and just hangs around his mother all the time, has made a stew for himself, lentil stew apparently. And Esau comes and he says, I'm famished, can I get some of that soup? And Jacob says, what's in it for me? And Esau's like, what do you mean? Well, I want you to give me your birthright. Birthright, by the way, in that culture means that when your parents die, you get double portion of the inheritance. But also, it means that you have recognition that you're the one that's carrying on the family name. That's what it means. But in the case of Abraham and Isaac, it's even more special because birthright means that you get the relationship and the acknowledgement of God that God had with Abraham and Isaac, and that's going to pass to Jacob instead of Esau. That's what birthright means. But Esau looked at it and heard about it, and he said, okay, I'm hungry and I'm so starved, I'm about to die. It's likely an exaggeration. He's not about to die. If he was about to die, he probably won't be able to speak. But he said, I'm about to die, so what use is birthright to me? Sure, you can take the birthright, give me the stew. So Jacob said, not so fast. Swear it to me first. And he says, okay, sure, I swear by everything that is good or whatever, give me the stew. So Jacob says, okay. That's what Esau means when he said, this is the second time he tricked me. First time he took my birthright, and now he's taking my blessing. So years later, Esau has now bloomed. He has 2 wives. He has many followers, apparently. And Isaac is now really old. And he said, I now want to bless my son. And I want to bless Esau because, I mean, come on. Who's the better son here? I mean, really. So Esau, I don't know when I'll die. I can hardly see anymore. Apparently, Isaac had some cataracts or some eye problem. He said, I cannot see. So I want you to go and hunt up some game for me as my sort of parting gift. Sort of depressing. Ironic too, because Isaac lived dozens and dozens of years after that. But hunt some game for me and give it to me as food, and I'll give you my blessing. I'll pass on my blessing from God to you. And Esau goes, sure, that sounds great. He goes and hunts. And Rebekah hears this. Now Rebekah remembers apparently God's prophecy about Esau and Jacob. So she gets Jacob and she says, okay, do what I tell you. I'm going to get me some goat. I'm going to prepare a food. We're going to pretend that this is the food that Esau got. You're going to pretend to be Esau. And Jacob freaks out and he says, no, look. Do you realize how different I am from Esau? He's a hairy man. I'm like smooth as a woman. He'll be able to tell me instantly, even if he can't see. And she goes, no, okay, get some fur. I'm going to put it on your arms so that you'll be like furry like animal. I don't know how hairy Esau was, but apparently he was very hairy. Get me some goat fur. I'll put it on your arms. Sort of turn your voice in. Make it more thicker. I don't know. Put on his perfume. Here's the food. Go get his blessing. Jacob goes, and I mean, not surprisingly, Isaac is very suspicious. He's like, who are you? He's like, I'm Esau. It's like, you don't sound like Esau. In fact, you sound like Jacob. And Jacob's like, no, I'm Esau. And it's like, so if that's so, how come you got the food so quick? And Jacob had to quickly come up with a lie. Yeah, God help me. So I got food very quickly. And Isaac's like, okay, something's up. Come. Sure, I can't see, but I need to check. And I think, it doesn't quite say, but I think God's hand was on this because Isaac sort of reaches out, touches Jacob and his goat fur on his arm, and he says, wow, you sound like Jacob, but you really are Esau. I don't know how he can be tricked by that. I don't know how he can be tricked and can't tell the difference between his goat and his son, but somehow it happened. He goes, so I guess you are Esau after all, and you smell like Esau. Rebekah put Esau's clothes on him. So he starts blessing Jacob. May you lord over all your brothers, all your relatives. May God's blessing fall on you. Jacob goes, phew, I did it. Leaves. And then we have this passage. Esau walks in with the food right afterwards. I think God's hand might also be on this. He walks in and he says, okay, I got it, Dad. Bless me. And Isaac goes, okay, who are you? What do you mean, who are you? You're the one that, are you kind of very old already now? Are you already going? You told me to go and get the food. Here's the food. Now bless me. And Isaac starts trembling and said, if that's you, Esau, then who's the person that just went and left? Because he's the one that got your blessing. Oh no. I think Jacob got your blessing. This is where Esau starts breaking down. Now, remember, Esau and Jacob both have seen that everything Isaac does just seems to turn out well. They know something's up with Isaac. And they've heard about Abraham, so they know that something's up with the entire family. So even Esau wants in on that blessing. So he says, do you have any blessing left? Any blessing? And he says he wept. This manly man, Esau, wept. And Isaac makes this blessing, which we haven't read. You will be away from the blessings of the earth because Jacob has taken all that blessing. And you will serve your brother, but one day you will be able to overthrow his rule. Now, understandably, Esau gets very angry. He immediately leaves and he starts saying stuff like this. The mourning days of my father is near, and then I'm going to kill Jacob. What that means is that I'm going to wait until my father dies and there's his funeral. That's why there's mourning for his father. I'm going to wait until my father dies, but as soon as my father dies, Jacob, you're a dead man. And Esau has the skill and the strength to do it. And Rebekah says, okay, if that happens, I'm going to lose my Jacob, my favorite son, or at least the son that God promised. And I'm going to lose Esau because he's going to be a murderer. Jacob, I need you to leave. She goes to Isaac and says, I hate Esau's wives. I want him to go and get a wife from my own people. So Isaac now knows what's up. So he goes to Jacob and says, okay, you got my blessing. I bless you again. Go to your mother's family. It's pretty far away, but go there and see if you get a wife. But their real goal is get away from Esau so he doesn't kill you. So Jacob leaves, and that's where you come to this passage. Jacob is now really penniless. He's fleeing. He's not going to get any inheritance because he's not, in his father's house. He just has enough for his travels. He's alone, friendless, though it seems that he never really had friends to begin with. And he takes a stone as a pillow and he sleeps. And that's where he has a vision, where there's a ladder from the earth going all the way to the distant heavens, to places where he cannot even see. And there's a figure at the top. Angels are going up and down. And the figure at the top, which he can hardly see, says, I am the God of Abraham and Isaac, your fathers. That power of that blessing that you know of and you heard of, that's me. And I'm going to bless you. So that your descendants will have this land, I'm going to bring you safely back to this place. And Jacob has no guarantee. I mean, if anything, it's likely that he will die in some foreign land because his brother has all the power and all the support of people around him. He's the one that is talented. He's the one that has everything, really, except for God's blessing. So Jacob wakes up and he makes his vow. If you really do as you promised, if you really bring me back, if you clothe me and shelter me, that I come back safely from that distant land back to my father's house, then you will be my God. I use this passage briefly. I never did a sermon on it, but I use this passage several times to illustrate a very key difference that I want all of us to always remember and have this point drilled into our heads, which is that there's a difference between saying God is everywhere and God is here. Or, to put it differently, there's a difference between saying God acts in all things and God acts for us. I recently heard that Oprah claimed she was a Christian. That's wonderful, but I'm like, what? She did? So I searched around, and one of the controversies she got into was that she was talking to an atheist who talked about wonders and goodness in people and nature, and Oprah said, well, if you have experienced that wonder and goodness and stuff like that, well, that's God for you. You're not really an atheist. And Christians got sort of angry saying, that's not really God, is it? And the atheists got angry saying, that's not really God, is it? But I think they miss Oprah's point. I'm trying to be sympathetic here. Because we can say that there is something even in what atheists talk about or believe that is very much like God. They just don't call it God. And I think rightly so. Why shouldn't they call it God? Because to call someone, not just God, but my God, is to have an interaction with Him. What that means is that we believe that God acts in all things. We believe that the entire universe, all the laws of nature and everything, history, is like God's speech. Sure, that's great. I love making that kind of statement because of my field of study. But to say He's my God is saying something more. Yes, God acts through nature. Yes, God acts in all things. But does God do particular things because He's in a relationship with me? For example, Jesus Christ. If God was not in an interactive, living relationship with human beings, Jesus would not need to come. We would have no need for Jesus. God would not need to send Jesus Christ. If God has no active relationship with me, there will be things that He won't do. Or to put it differently, do we have the kind of relationship with God that God does things not because He normally does them anyway, sort of like how making the stars turn or whatever, or atoms move in certain ways, but He does things because he's in a relationship with me, because he's in a relationship with our church. Do we have that kind of relationship? And that's what Jacob is talking about. God is here. And the thing that he mentions afterward is that too. If you're in a relationship with me, then you're going to specifically protect me, guide me, so that I'm going to go to that distant land and be able to come back with clothes on my back, with enough food. You're going to do this for me. If you do this for me, you have the kind of relationship in which I can call you my God instead of some divine spirit or whatever it is. And I know this, or I want this, because I have seen what you do with Isaac and Abraham, or heard of what you did with Abraham. I am after that blessing. What makes Jacob the people of God, the example of the people of God? Well, if you see Jacob is not a very likable character. Perhaps it can be sympathetic because Esau excelled in everything that Jacob sucked at. But there's more. Jacob is a trickster, not even a good trickster. He's not a clever one. He gets scared very easily. Rebekah's the one that actually tricked Isaac. Jacob's the one that wanted to chicken out. Everything he got was through either trickery or, I guess, not quite blackmailing, but with the food. I mean, it's a bowl of stew. Why is he trying to get birthright out? I mean, he's not a very likable character. He's very greedy, very selfish. What makes him then the people of God? What makes him the example of the people of God? Well, this. He's greedy for God. Not for good reasons, by the way, for all the selfish reasons. But he's greedy for God. In that story where Esau sells his birthright, there's that one small but a revealing statement. So Esau hated his birthright. Not in the sense that I hate my birthright, but he didn't really care about his birthright. Or to be more specific, he didn't really care about God's blessing. He didn't think much of it. Jacob was greedy for it, probably because he didn't have anything else. But because he was greedy for it, he reached out to God for it. And in fact, we'll read later on in 2 weeks that he was willing to wrestle. He was willing to take it from God because he knew and he was convinced that wrestling with God, going after his blessing, was worth the effort, was worth deceiving his own brother. Now, Jacob will pay for the kind of things that he did. He deceived a lot of people, and we'll see throughout his life that then he gets deceived by basically everyone in his life. But one constant thing that threads through in Jacob's entire life is his greed to reach and have God acknowledge him. Now, we at the church, we do many things in our lives, many things that are truly worthwhile, obviously, in work or studies, social interactions. And we do these things because we know there is a solid outcome. For example, I actually like playing games, video games. But one of the reasons why I like playing video games, it has a very solid outcome. You do certain things happen in the game. It's very clear and straightforward. With God, it doesn't seem like that often. It doesn't seem like a straightforward outcome. But Jacob knew to go after it. We do many things because we expect an outcome, so we work for it, we study for it, we put time into it. But what about God? We say we believe in God, we say a lot of things about God, but if we say we believe in God, if we say we believe in the blessings of God, what are we doing because of it? What are we putting in because of it? Sometimes God breaks into our lives and shows who He is, but sometimes He simply waits. And He asks, I'm here. What are you doing for me to act? what are you doing to making me act? Do you really want my blessing? Do you really want me to answer your prayer? Do you really believe that this interaction is worthwhile? And even though we say that it is, sometimes in our lives, that doesn't seem to be true. We have a retreat coming up this Sunday, and there are many things that's happening. Other than just this retreat, there are many things that are happening both in the church and outside the church. Perhaps the reading the scriptures, perhaps doing that prayer. Do you think it's worth it? Do you think it's worth putting in the time? Or are we doing this because it's just things that we do? When we pray and we ask for God's blessing, even for very greedy reasons, all right, for selfish reasons, we ask and we pray and we shake God for blessing. Do we expect there to be a difference? Do we expect that what we put in, God's going to respond in some ways, even if it's a no? Do we expect that? Because if you don't, our prayers are going to be a laundry list of things that we need to do. Oh, we need to give a praise to God. Okay, oh God, you're so great. We need to give thanks to God. Oh God, thanks for this day. Give some requests. Oh God, help me and help you. It becomes a dry laundry list. Jacob, who is untalented, deceitful, greedy, and selfish, still knows that one truth about God. Sometimes you got to try to grab God and shake Him. Sometimes you got to thirst for God to respond. That's what being people of God are. So I ask you as we pray at the conclusion of the service, what are you doing? If you really believe in God, what are you doing? What are you putting in right now for God to respond? So, Lord Father, we want to be honest before you. We say a whole bunch of things about you and all the platitudes and all the praises, but sometimes the way we act, the things that we put in, whatever it is, for you to act, for you to interact with us, we don't really do that. It's as if we don't believe in the things that we say about you. Oh Lord, we want our faith to be real. Oh Lord, enable us to act. Enable us to put something in. Even if you say no, even if you don't respond the way we like, oh Lord, at least respond. At least respond. So that in our action, in your action, in our interaction, our relationship with you will grow. And our relationship with you will become authentic and real. We pray all of this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.